to center field. Robles back. Ball game. And the Washington Nationals are LA bound.
Dave Ross here inside these stadium studios talking baseball with our GM, Steve Phillips, our skipper, John Farrell, and our player, Trevor Plouffe. We saw the Nationals move on in the National League by winning their first ever series, a one-game series, if you will, in that thrilling 4-3 win over the Milwaukee Brewers. And I wonder if that's a fair representation as you get to the playoffs. And Trevor, I'll start off with you as a player. Do you think one game after 162 is fair to determine who moves on?
As a player, I really don't think it's fair. I mean, you spend the entire offseason getting ready for the season. Then you have spring training, and then you play 162 games. And for it all to be decided for one game is very tough, especially if you're on the losing end. I definitely understand it as a fan. It's essentially a Game 7. It's managed differently. It's a whole new type of baseball. So I understand it from a fan's perspective. And actually, I was crowdsourcing this a little bit on Twitter to see what people wanted to say. And what I found interesting about it was they said if your team's not in the wild card game, you love watching the wild card game. If your team's in the wild card game, you hate watching the wild card game. So it's very polarizing, this one-game playoff.
Yeah, I think the pushback for the teams that have won a division, if you go to a three-game series, so to speak, a best of three, as a divisional winner, you're waiting around 3 or 4 days to get back into the postseason action. And this is such a game of everyday repetition and getting in and maintaining that routine. So there's going to be a give and take and two sides to this issue. But I'd like to see something in the wild card situation where you have to recognize the team that finished the better of the two wild cards. So if the second wild card team has to beat that first team twice, as opposed to the leading wild card team only has to win one to advance. So there's a lot of different variations and options that you could look to do this. This probably also gives credence to, if you were to go to an expanded playoff, to pull the regular season back to 154 games, which that creates its own issues of itself. But it's an exciting game, a one-game play-in with all hands on deck. But I think there's got to be something more than just one game for those teams that have gone through 162.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the three-game series. I just am. Now, one of the ways to do it to sort of, I think, account for what John's talking about is maybe the team with the best record, the number one wildcard team, all the games are played at their stadium. So there's not a travel day in between to start to eliminate some of the time. I get for the division winners, the waiting period of maybe getting a little rusty can be a problem, but that may be counterbalanced by the wild card winner potentially having to play 3 games in order to advance. The other thing is this, that the one-game wild card matchup, the sort of play-in game, isn't the normal baseball that we play, where you could see a team like the Nationals go with Scherzer, then Strasburg, and if they had to, go Corbin, and it becomes a different game where you're going all starting pitchers, all your best guys, and you're not really managing it with the way you do over 162 games in the regular season, where your bullpen is part of all of it. So I think the 3-game series would work. I don't think owners are going to want to give up dates during the regular season to go to 154, but I think there's a way to limit the time and maybe disadvantage the wild card teams and not completely hurt the division winners overall, but make it more fair that a 3-game series is a better balance.
One other thing I want to bring to y'all's attention that you all already know, but I hear a lot of, I would say, consternation during the 162 season of baseball's too long, we got to speed it up, we got to change it, and then we get to the postseason, and I never hear those arguments again. Steve, when we look at the first game of the playoffs, and I'll start with you in this one, isn't that what's always great about baseball, that there isn't a clock still on it? Does anybody have a problem? I know they went to replay to make sure that Michael A. Taylor actually got hit, whether or not hit the bat or not. But do we find out the beauty of baseball again is in the game, the simplicity of it, without trying to gimmick it up once we get to the postseason?
Yeah, I think that there's no question that you know the beauty of baseball is the 9 innings, 60 feet 6 inches, 3 outs, and trying to everything that we do to sort of play the game out. As much as we can avoid sort of putting gimmicks in, I'm not a big fan of pitchers staying in to face 3 batters and all of the other things we're trying to change about the game. But I do think that there is a part of the postseason where the game is played differently, with the extra off days being built in. Managers have, I think, a certain way to be able to manage to use starters to come back on short rest. They can use relievers more frequently than they can during the regular season. So it's not exactly the same sort of details in the postseason that we enjoy during the regular season. I think the 162 games is the right amount of time. It's a grind. There's no question it's a marathon, but I think it's what ultimately allows you to sort of earn that ring at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, when you're looking at October, you can cover up some deficiencies on your roster with usage of players a little bit differently. We're seeing starters come in, just as you mentioned, Steve. If a bullpen, the middle relief has been an issue for a club, and maybe the projection of them going deep into October, well, all of a sudden you use a Strasburg for 3 innings, or like you saw the Red Sox last year, use Price, use Sale, use Porcello out of the bullpen. So I think that shows the mentality and mindset of players at that time of year, where they're willing to do everything, and the quote-unquote role of what they've been involved in over 162, that gets thrown out the window for the betterment of the team.
Yeah, I think we could take 10 games off the regular season, and it's still going to be a grind. I mean, 152 games, 154, whatever you want to do, it's still going to be a grind. What I really like about the postseason is the manager becomes really important again. We're kind of seeing that go away during the regular season, where a lot of the game is scripted for a manager from the front office. But when we saw the Brewers last night, Counsell managed that game perfectly. If they would have came with a victory, we would have talked about how well he managed his bullpen, how well he managed his pitching staff. And I think managers in the playoffs, that's where they earn their money. I think that's a big difference between the regular season and the postseason, and it's really cool to see that happening during the playoffs.
Absolutely, and it's just getting kick-started. Gentlemen, could talk baseball with you guys all day. Thanks again to Steve Phillips, John Farrell, Trevor Plouffe. Enjoy the postseason of Major League Baseball.